2021 is a Zoom series as well as a set of recorded conversations about what it is like to parent in our current crazy world. We are living in a world unlike anything we have ever experienced before, and so we're needing to parent in a way unlike we ever have before. Not only that, in a world in which we are doing so many things virtually, we're inundated with these parenting messages from social media, and everybody's kid looks cute on Instagram. But in real life, what is parenting like? And so we're taking some time as a community to have some conversations about what it's like and what we can do to support each other so our children can have the best options to grow and to flourish. So I welcome you here to our first recorded session. This session happened about a week ago, and we opened it up talking about stress and anxiety. What is it like to parent in this current world? If you think back over the last 10, 11 months, we've had a pandemic. We've had a whole summer of racial unrest. We've had a very stormy, very controversial political season. We have had brush fires in Australia. We forgot about those, right? We've had meth gators, and we've had killer bees, and we've had everything under the sun that we could think about. And in very real ways, it's impacted us and it's impacted our lives. And our worry is, how is it going to impact our children? That's the biggest worry, because we're parents and we love our kids and we want good and wonderful things for our children, so we worry about them. So this first night is just a conversation about that, a conversation about what stress and anxiety looks like for our children and what it is that we as parents can do to help and support them. We're going to follow this up with a few more sessions. I really hope that you can join us. I want to remind you that the intention of this is to support you. If you don't feel supported by this video, please don't watch it. You only have so much emotional energy in your space, in your head, and in your heart. So please do the things that nurture you, because my biggest reminder for you is that you are already the best parent that your child has right now. Right now, at this exact moment in time, you are doing an incredible and an awesome job. And there's nobody else in this world that can parent your children the way you can. And that's so important for us to remember. You are good. You are doing a good job. You are raising your kids with love and commitment. And the idea behind this series is that, isn't it nice when we can do it together? Because together we are stronger, together we grow as a community, and together our children really flourish. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed this first night. I know that there were a couple of issues with our video recording. Hopefully we'll get those smoothed out for future sessions. Thanks. So what we wanted to do tonight is we wanted to look a little bit at what we know. What is it that we know about stress? What is it that we know about anxiety? And what does the research tell us about how our kids are currently dealing with that? And then from that, where do we go? So one of the things that is kind of interesting, and the reason why this happened, is at the middle school, we put out just a really brief survey. We put it out to parents, teachers, and students. And we asked, we didn't ask a lot of questions. We just kind of asked, how are you feeling about this? How are you feeling about coming out? How are you feeling about staying home? And just kind of to gauge where we were at. And our kids had nothing really significant to say. They wanted to come back. They wanted to see their friends, but parents and teachers, we heard worry from, and we heard stress from, and we heard that concern of, what do we do and how do we help our kids? So we thought that we would put this together to start that conversation, because we saw that it wasn't our kids that needed more support, it was our adults that needed more support. And so that's the start of this conversation. That's kind of where we're starting from and why we're here talking. And what's really interesting is they started doing research, in the midst of everything else that was going on. When you think about
us as a school, and really we're pretty reflective of what schools across the country we're dealing with, as well as schools in England and different parts of Europe, is that we went home in March. um and we were expecting to come back in 2 weeks. We all went home. We left all of our stuff. We're like, no big deal. We'll be back, 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks go by, and we extended it a little longer, and then we extended it a little bit longer through the end of the school year. And so we were starting to get worried, right? We started getting worried about our kids. What does this mean for our kids, that our kids are home? They're home with us. What does this mean? How should we be, how should we be worrying about our children? And they started doing some research on them. And the research that came out at the end of the school year and over the summer indicated that our kids weren't stressed out. Our kids weren't anxious. Our kids weren't scared. We actually had record low numbers of anxiety in children at the end of the last school year. And that's kind of counterintuitive. It's not what we were expecting to happen. We were really expecting, hang on one second, I'm just going to admit 2 more people on in. I'm not too sure why that. So what ended up happening is we didn't think that was the direction. We kept thinking our kids are going to be so stressed out, and our kids are going to be so scared, and oh no, what's going to happen for our kids? And as it turns out, our kids were fine. Our kids had record low numbers of anxiety. And so some of the research started really delving into that. Why are our kids at this point having record low numbers of stress and anxiety when we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're expecting our kids to be way stressed out? And what started emerging from the research was that our kids had record low numbers of anxiety because they didn't have their typical stressors. They didn't have to worry about tests. They weren't, nobody was taking the PSSAs. Nobody was stressing out about that. Nobody was stressing out about homework. Our families weren't being pulled in a million different directions. I don't know about you guys, but I've got 3 kids, and some days it feels like, everybody in my family's just passing, right? Like, because this one has to go there and this one has to go there. And what about this? And over this past spring, we really stopped that. And we found that the rates of anxiety in our kids really decreased. And we started this school year kind of with that knowledge, but also with that feeling still in the back of our minds. But what if our kids are going to be stressed out? And what if our kids are still going to struggle? And we had a lot of worries about this year, starting this year with our kids, right? We all did. As parents, we had worries. As administrators, we had worries. As school counselors, as teachers, we were worried. How are our kids going to start this year? And I remember thinking, how am I supposed to send my kid to school? He's going to eat his mask. Like, there is no way my kid's going to put on a mask and wear a mask all day. Like, come on now. And we sent kids to school, and you know what they did? They wore masks all day like that. Like, you wouldn't even believe, we had all of these concerns, and our kids were like, all right, I guess we're wearing masks now. And they all put on their masks and they came to school and they started learning, and they started doing better than we were expecting. So when we look, where do we typically look in schools to kind of pull our data and to see how we're doing? We look a couple different places. Like I said, we did a new needs survey at the middle school, and we found out at the middle school, our kids overall, we had kids that were concerned. It's not that we don't have kids that are concerned, but overall, our kids who were worried, our numbers were very low there in our needs survey. When we look at our discipline referrals were down. When we looked at our rates of middle school drama, like, she looked at me funny in the lunchroom, and my friend talked about your friend who talked about your friend, and we're going to be in a fight. All of those, that kind of, it's not that it didn't happen at all, but it happened at drastically reduced levels. So we saw some good things. We saw kids that were able to come to school and wear a mask all day without having a huge issue. We saw kids that were able to stay 6 feet apart. They were able to hand sanitize and wash their hands. Like, our concerns of, like, how are we going to get all of these kids to wash their hands to get where they need? They just did it, right? They sat 6 feet apart. They ate their lunches. They were fine. They adapted. Our discipline rates were down. Our middle school drama rates were down. The last one on there is our one piece of not so good data, which is our grades were down as well. And it's interesting to think about this piece of data of our grades being down, because when we think as a parent how we evaluate how our child is doing in school, when we think about how is our child doing in school, we think about what do their grades look like, right? So when I think, how is my kid doing, I look at their grade, and when I see a grade I don't like, I'm like, oh, they're not doing good and school's not doing good. And I, as a parent, start having my anxiety and my stress level start rising up because we're conditioned to think of success in school as good grades. And we're conditioned to think if I'm a good parent, I'm going to parent my kid into good grades. Except if we're living in the middle of a pandemic and our kids are at home and our kids are at school and our kids are learning virtually and they're learning in person, and we've just flipped this entire thing around, we can't expect the same results. So overall, yet again, this is another place where our kids are doing all right. They could grades be better? Sure. But is it also okay where they're at? It's also okay. And I think as parents, it doesn't feel okay. And it doesn't feel comfortable to be in a situation where you're struggling to catch up, right? Or you're struggling to figure out how to help with a virtual assignment. And so then as parents, we're once again spinning our wheels and struggling and racing to catch up. And so what does that do? It adds to the stress. It adds to the anxiety, and it adds to this feeling of the world that we're in. Because the world that we're in has very real things that we're dealing with. When we think about us as adults and we think about the consequences of the past year, there are very real health concerns that are impacting our community. Regardless of which side of the political debate you're on, there's very real political issues that are being discussed in our country. So we're dealing with all of these really big, really heavy, really emotional issues as parents in this current world. And we're dealing with all of that while as parents, we're trying really hard to hold it together. And we're trying really hard to make sure that the world's okay for our kids, because that's what we do, right? That's why on a random Wednesday night, you show up on Zoom and you join us to talk about parenting in 2021, because we have a want and an urge to be a good mom, to be a great dad, to make sure that our kids are okay. And what happens is we have these very big, very real things that are happening. And then the one piece of data that we as parents use to judge how our kids are doing in school is the place where our kids seem to be struggling the most, which is their grades. And that's why we wanted to come and talk. And that's why we really wanted to kind of delve into this. One, to say, it's not to say that grades aren't important. I know that Dr. Caruso's on here as a parent, but he's still the principal of the middle school. So I still do need to say that grades are, of course, important. It's not that they're not. It's just that, what do grades tell us? Grades tell us how well our students can convey back to us the information that we've taught them. Well, when we think about our world and how very different this is than it's ever been, how do our students share with us back the information, right? Well, it used to be that we were in class and we'd have conversations, or we'd sit down next to a kid and we'd go through it together. But when we're across a computer, we don't have those same conversations. It's not that our teachers aren't working hard. Our teachers are working harder than I've ever seen them work before. It's just we're all working so very differently that we haven't quite caught up yet. And it doesn't mean that our kids are falling behind by any stretch of the imagination. I cannot stress this enough. This 1 year is not going to have a negative impact on any of our kids' lives from a grade standpoint. It is 1 year. And it is 1 year where we can very easily catch up anybody that we need to catch up if we've ended up struggling, because this isn't our grades aren't the most important thing. How our kids are doing is the most important thing, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're talking tonight. So it's interesting. A couple of years ago, I know some of you guys know who my kids are. So I have three. My oldest is in high school, but my middle one is in second grade. And a couple of years ago, he always has something to say, my little second grader. So a couple of years ago, sitting at the counter, he's eating a snack after school, and he looks at me very sincerely, and he goes, "Mama," and he sighs like really deep, like he's gonna tell me something. He goes, "Mama, you're in charge of this house, and you're in charge of me and brother and daddy, but you're not in charge of the whole world." I was all like, "Oh, well then, Patrick." Like I didn't really like that he said that. I mean, I like that he said that I was in charge of him and his brother and his dad. No, I'm not in charge of my daughter, just the two boys, and my husband. I'm in charge of the house, but I'm not in charge of the whole world. And as hard as that lesson was for me to hear from a 5-year-old, I think it's important for us to acknowledge. It's important for us to acknowledge that we cannot control the whole world. We cannot control murder hornets. We are not in charge of meth gators. There is nothing that we can currently do in Hawley, Pennsylvania to impact meth gators. We are not in charge of so many different things in the world around us. We are in charge of our homes. We are in charge of how we're interacting with our children. And we are in charge of whether or not we're going to build a stronger boat. We said before, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And so what comes to us is, if we can't control the world, what can we do? What knowledge can we take to build stronger boats so we can provide more stability and more safety for our children in this very crazy world that we find ourselves in? And so what we want to look at when we're looking at how do we build a stronger boat, we want to look at what resiliency is. And we want to look at how we're handling and building up resiliency. So resiliency is what causes us to bounce back, right? Resiliency is how we incorporate and respond to negative things that happen around us, like a bouncing ball, like a rubber band. We don't want our kids to snap. We want our kids to have some elasticity, and we want our kids to be able to come back from difficult situations that they might be experiencing this year. But we also want this throughout their lifetime. We want to be raising kids that throughout their lifetime can experience some difficult things and come back from that. So one of the researchers that's done a lot on resiliency, a lot of research on resiliency is a woman by the name of Dr. Brene Brown. And Dr. Brown has done a lot of research over the course of many years about what it means to be resilient, and what does it mean to keep going in the face of difficult things. And one of the things she's very clear to point out is that there's a difference between adversity and trauma. And she's specific to point this out with our kids, because one of the things she's saying happens is that we tend to overprotect our kids from adversity. But then we also tend to expose them to trauma without that previous experience of adversity. So to kind of like talk about it and break it down a little bit more, when we're thinking about raising kids, right? And we're thinking about if we're a helicopter parent, or maybe we're a bulldozer parent, right? Because as a parent, we want to do a good job. And as a parent, we want things to be good for our kids, and we want our kids to be happy, and we want our kids to be healthy, and we want our kids to be well. So there's sometimes that need and that urge to make sure everything in their life is good, right? I'm a parent, and maybe it's just me, but I want my kids, and I bet it's also you. We want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to be healthy. So we tend to try to protect them from the things that make them unhappy. or we try to protect them from the things that are uncomfortable for them. And what we need to be careful in doing in that is we don't want to protect our children to the extent that they never experience difficulty, because then they haven't built up the skill level and the tolerance level to then deal with very big things that happen. So if we don't allow our children to experience adversity, when our children are exposed to trauma, it's very overwhelming because they don't have a previous experience of having dealt with something difficult. So it's one of the things that we're kind of thinking about and talking about is how do we allow our children to take risks, and how do we allow our children to experience failure in safe and supported ways, so that way they can build up their resiliency, they can build up their skill set and their ability to deal with some difficult things that might come their way and some difficult things that they might experience. When we're thinking about resiliency, when we're thinking about what are the things that can help build resiliency in our children, we're thinking about a couple of core levels. One is a parental resilience. If as a parent we're modeling resiliency, if as a parent we're modeling that ability to deal with difficult situations and overcome them, our children are seeing that. And so there's a connection between how we react to things to how our children react to things, right? It's kind of like, like with little kids, when they fall and get hurt, you never go, oh no, like, your kid falls and gets hurt and you clap for them, like, yay, look at you got up, and all of a sudden it goes from screaming and crying to like smiling, laughing, yeah, I got up, so when we model resilience, and a lot of times as parents, we start modeling that when they're really, really young, they bump their head and we give it a kiss and we say, oh, better, we don't dwell on the difficulty. We model for them how to handle resiliency. Another key factor is social connections. And this one's interesting because I think that this was a big concern for a lot of us coming back to school this year. How are our kids going to handle the social aspect of this year? Because our social aspect of this year has been very different. And it's been really lovely to see how our kids are able to continue socializing with each other, even in this world. At the middle school, our kids in the lunchroom, our kids are sitting in desks. So we've got our kids all lined up in their desks in the lunchroom. And that's normally where our kids did a lot of their socializing. They did a lot of their talking in the lunchroom. And this year, because of COVID precautions, we have them in desks. They're all facing the same way. They're spaced out. Mr. Baselli, Dr. Caruso, they've done an awesome job, Mr. Bronson, of really setting that up for us. And we were kind of worried, like, well, how are the kids going to have that social aspect of lunchtime? And our kids figured it out before we could even start offering suggestions. They got onto Teams and they started calling each other during lunches. So you'll walk into our lunchroom and you'll see the kids, they have their iPads set up. They have their lunch and they have their friends that they're still, they might be across the room from their friends, but their friends are also right in front of them on their iPad and they're still talking and they're still socializing. One of the other things that is a key reflection in times of difficulty is concrete support. It's one thing, we've all kind of been there where somebody said, give me a call if you need anything. And it's just kind of like a nice thing that somebody says, but you're never going to call them and that nothing's ever going to come out of that. And that is such a difference between somebody saying, hey, I'm going to bring you over dinner on Tuesday. Let me know if you have any allergies, right? Those are two different examples of the kind of support that we offer to people and the kind of support that we need. And the more concrete support that we have, the more resilient we are. It just kind of makes sense, right? Another big factor is knowing developmental levels. I think that we have this urge to kind of see our kids on one extreme or another, right? Either they're too young to understand it, or we're worried about them, integrating this on a way higher level than what they are. And one of the things that's so important, and one of the things that has been coming out for us a lot in school, is the need for our children to talk about what's happening in the world around them in concrete and real ways. It's this year has been really interesting. I'm the 7th grade counselor this year. And so it's been a really interesting year for history class, seventh grade history. We start out the year talking about types of governments. So we start out the year talking about democracy and how a republic works and how the election. So that's where we start the year in seventh grade in history. Is we start the year talking about different types of governments and our government, and then we transition into the Middle Ages. So our seventh grade students started out the year talking about democracy and elections. And right now, just this past week, they've started talking about the plague. So our kids in history class are talking about some huge things that are happening in the world around us. And they're having excellent conversations based on their level of understanding. And they're able to talk with each other about it. And it's a really impressive thing. So I think that, when we're looking at the parental model of resilience that we're putting up, when we're looking at the social connections that we're encouraging our kids in this weird and different world that we're socializing in, when we're looking at concrete supports, the fact that our school district has been able to provide free lunch and breakfast for all of our students since the start of the school year. That's concrete support. When we're talking about discussing things on the developmental level of our children, but making sure that they have the knowledge they need to understand what's happening, to understand why there's a heightened level of stress. And then the last thing that we're looking at is really social emotional competence. And that's really looking at how can we build up in our students and in our children this social and emotional intelligence. And so when we're thinking about a social emotional intelligence, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a wall of resiliency. We're trying to build a protective wall around our kids so that way they can start dealing with the world around them, right? And the stronger the wall that we build, the safer our kids are and the more resilient that they are. And so this is the part where we're going to start having some conversation back and forth. I put things on this wall. A lot of this is research-based protective factors for children. But I would urge you, when you look at this, don't think that all of these things should happen for all of our kids at all times. These are a list of things that are helpful. And these are a list of things that our kids would be great if our kids could have and our kids could do. But there is by no stretch of the imagination the concept that all kids are going to have all these things, or that all kids or some kids or any kids are going to have all of these things every day. So for example, routines. Our kids having a routine is a protective factor. When kids know what to expect next, they're more secure in their worlds. But we're living in 2021, so our routines have been kind of revised a lot. That's just what I keep saying. We're revising our routine. But we have to, right? We have to be able to adapt with our routines. Things that can serve as a protective factor is laughter. When we look at the research of how often children laugh at much higher rates than what adults laugh at, right? If you've been around a little kid, you know that they're laughing all the time. And laughter really serves as such a protective factor for us when we're engaging in what can be some difficult things. Some of this stuff is just kind of obvious, and I think that I don't have to explain it. I know that you all know that, if everybody's healthy in our family, that's a protective factor. When people are sick, we're a little less resilient. Our boat is a little bit more wobbly when people are sick. That's just kind of, like a simple one. Getting good amounts of sleep. Having family support, having extended family support, having supportive adults outside of our family system is huge for our kids, is huge protective factors. Consistency, clear rules, the ability to problem solve, the ability to take safe risks, right? If we never allow our kids the ability to take some risks, they never really learn how to navigate that. So we have to provide opportunities for them to take risks, but take those risks safely. One of the big ones that's on here is stories. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time with that one because I think that that's really important. Because stories is not just our kids reading stories or listening to stories or watching stories on TV. Um, but it's also us telling them stories about themselves and allowing them to tell us stories about themselves. And that process, that narrative process of talking about what we've experienced and writing our own end to the story, framing it in a positive way can have real and substantial impacts on resilience. Being able to read a book or listen to a book or watch a movie about a kid who has lived through a hard time and successfully, and to be able to see ourselves in the stories of others is a huge protective factor, and it builds on hope. um, there's some really interesting research out there about music, pets, physical touch, and how that helps rewire the brain for more resiliency. Um, so some of these things are the building blocks that we put into a wall to create protective factors for our children. And right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a couple minutes because this is kind of an opportunity. One of our goals was to share some information, but also open this up to conversations, because I think that we all have different kids. We all have different thoughts and different needs about where it is that we are right now and what it is that we might need right now. So I just kind of wanted to open it up to say, what are your thoughts, and what are some questions or some things that you're doing in your family that's really helpful, or what are you guys thinking?
To introduce myself. I've got a first grader and a fifth grader. Happen to be a teacher too, but first and fifth grader. I guess if we're gonna talk about like what I find incredibly helpful, we've maintained a pretty tight little bubble. It's really stayed tight because I feel such honestly incredible guilt for taking away. I feel like I took away all of their sports and activities and all of that. So to maintain that little bubble has been necessary for us. And I think they're doing okay with that. They became their own little team.
Yeah.
So that might work for others.
And isn't it interesting, because we tell our kids, at the middle school level and at high school, we tell kids all the time, you don't need a million friends, right? Like, and because how often do kids want that? They want to be popular, right? So at middle school, we're always saying, you don't need a million friends. Like, have one or two good friends that you can do these things with, and you'll be fine. And it sounds like you've kind of built that for your kids, Chrissy, is like that kind of concept of, if we keep this group and we keep together and we keep socializing, we're still going to be okay because we're still socializing. We're still doing those things we need to do in order to be happy and healthy.
That's kind of what we've done. Yeah. It's the niece and the nephew. We're all one big group.
Well, I'll just piggyback off of what, Kara, you were saying before. I don't have any kids of my own just yet, but as the sixth grade counselor, it's amazing. Usually by now I have had kid after kid, mostly girls, of course, coming into my office with all sorts of drama and crazy stuff going on. And, as Mrs. Dory and I were like talking about this presentation, I thought about it and I'm like, I've had like two kids come into my office this year. It's the middle of January. And that's the level of drama that I've had. And I'm sure there's other things that are going on, but it hasn't reached the level of my office, which is crazy. Like the places that they normally would have those times of drama, like the cafeteria, the tutorial, being able to walk the hallways, it's not there. So like those are kind of positives as far as their mental health goes, because they're not having those kind of arguments with friends. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that they haven't seen a lot of their friends since March. So they're finding that appreciation of like seeing their friends again, and that's good for them. And it's a kind of a sad thing that when I ask them, what makes you most excited about being back at school? And they're like, I get to see my friends again. And it's just a simple pleasure that we really took for granted until now.
High school today, a lot of the kids came back, within the past couple of days, but I had one young lady today she said, I'm just so grateful to have school. And so many people kids have expressed that, and so many kids who would never have expressed that in the past, how grateful they are to just have school. And I think it's that routine. So keeping kids in that routine is great. And even when we were virtual, the routine of checking into classes and saying hello every morning to their various teachers, I think was really beneficial. So those routines are great. Just having that consistency where consistency is hard to find.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'll come at this as a parent. Obviously, I guess I'm here in two roles tonight. Principal of the building, but I also have a daughter in 6th grade in the middle school. I have a son in 3rd grade. I can see that my wife is also on this Zoom here too. So she must be hiding somewhere else in the house here. So maybe she could chime in too. But I know that there are still some kiddos who are still virtual for their own reasons, and as a school we always respect that. But I can tell you, the routine thing is definitely very, very helpful, because I know how challenging it is, especially in a situation where, as a parent, you've got your responsibilities as a parent, right? So, when we were virtual, I was at school. My wife was teaching from home. Both of my kids are, lack of a better phrasing, kind of on their own, but expected to understand the expectations for making sure that they're getting on and getting their schoolwork done, because they don't have somebody that's able to hover over their shoulder. But I think that after the fact time, when getting the family together for an opportunity to check in on them, but to also be able to have some time to do some of the things that were in the building blocks of the protective wall that Kara had up on the previous slide here, of some family movie nights, some family game nights, have really helped us. I feel like the limited contact that we've had with people from the outside has kind of brought our family a little bit closer, because we've been doing a lot more of those things. And I think it's kind of helped with the attitude of the kids too, especially my 6th grade daughter, who young, but I would say routines and some of those off school topic, just family movie night, kids pick a movie, let's pick a game. We've taught the kids how to play Uno at one time, which was a favorite game of mine when I was a kid. So, those things are definitely things to kind of keep the family bond going too during these tough times.
Okay, I'm here.
Yay. Hey, Heather.
So, I was so afraid to participate because, I don't know if what my daughter did during remote learning would be frowned upon. But to piggyback off of what Kara said, as far as the children are very creative as to how they are staying in contact. Every morning right before Ava's first conference, she would FaceTime one of her closest friends that actually COVID brought them closer together. And as best as I could, I would listen in while I was doing my own thing, but they weren't sharing answers. They just FaceTimed each other, put the phone down, but they still felt connected. And I think they may have done a couple of things together, but then her mom would keep an eye on them and text me I think they're 5 minutes late for their conference. So then I would have to step in. But I was going to share, and then I'm oh, maybe that's not allowed. But as strange as it is, quarantine brought her one of her best friends. And I think we as parents are sad for our kids, because middle school for them is not what we had. But you don't know you don't miss what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize if my child broke the rule, but they weren't cheating, I promise.
Well, we won't tell the principal,
Principal's
Heather.
gonna fail her anyway, so it's all good.
Well, and Heather, I think you bring up such a good point in your hesitancy to say that, because I think that we have this expectation for what it is that we're going to be able to like do in this situation, right? And there's like that pressure to have like an Instagram worthy day. Or like, you know what I mean? You know, you do your Pinterest stuff and you know, you can post your pretty pictures to Facebook and your kids can get on Honor Society. You can do all these things. There's like that pressure as a parent. And then, you know, and then it's not reality, because nobody's Instagram pictures are their reality. At least that's what I keep telling myself when I have to like crop my pictures to just somebody's head to post them. But there's so much that we feel pressure to get right instead of just letting it be. And like you said, our kids don't miss what they don't have. Like they don't miss what they've never had. So if this is their 6th grade experience, then this experience is what they know middle school to be. And it's good and it's okay.
When I returned, this is just how on Pinterest my house was during remote. My 8th grader said, "So how's Dominic doing?" I'm like, "How do you know my son's name?" I didn't even realize that during my teaching, I'm like, Dominic, shh, Dominic, you have to go in the other room. They're like, "How's he doing now?" Like, and I feel like maybe it made like, you know, the teachers and the kids, like it's a whole different relationship. The fact that the teachers are able to see into like the kids' homes and get to know like their siblings, because I'm sure Abe and Dominic hopped on each other's conferences.
That I love about you know, the kids when they were all home is that I did these Meet with Me Wednesdays, and it was like one of the most exciting things for them was like showing me all around, you know, like their pets and stuff, and they were so excited for that. That was like the highlight of our meetings. And that was, you know, that was one thing that I said to them. I never would have got a chance to see their pets if it wasn't for, you know, the COVID nonsense.
Yeah, and like to back off of what Lauren said, like I think we need to get out of this mindset. Like I feel so bad for these kids. I feel so bad for these kids.
Mm-hmm.
There's a positive in it. Like Lauren got to see kids' pets, and like what's so like that's so cool. You know, like the kids got to show you something that's so important to them, and I think we have to just start to think of this as a positive. And Kara brought up some great ways that this is positive for them.
So I want to be aware of our time, because mostly I want to be aware of our time because I've bribed my children to stay out of this room for 1 hour. So I have 7 more minutes before that ice cream wears off and there's going to be like chaos behind me. But I wanted to, you know, just really ask the question, is there, what as parents do you need from us as a school? Because one of the things that we know is that concrete support is different than just vague offers of support. So in a concrete way, as a parent, is there anything that you think this would be really helpful if the middle school could do, if the school counseling program could do? You know, what is it as a parent that you need support in that we can help with?